Praise the Lord, everyone. Welcome to our January 14th, 2005 City Council Work Session. I'd like to now turn it over to City Manager to walk us through the agenda overview.
Thank you, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of City Council. Happy New Year. We have had a retreat where I've gotten to say that, but we haven't said it here in Chambers. So I want to tell each one of you Happy New Year. I want to offer congratulations to those who've been elected to the 2025 cycle, Dr. Wilder, Mr. Feraldi, Vice Mayor Deemer, and Mrs. Timmer. Congratulations on your appointments. I look forward to working with each one of you this year. Looking at the agenda that's put before you, we have two opportunities to brief you on two very important items, one of which was very appropriate and immediate considering the cold snap and snow that we've seen in the last several weeks. So Kent White will engage you on the warming center and sheltering update. You'll recall we've worked with different partners to include the Salvation Army. We've actually asked many of our workforce to volunteer and participate. Kent's going to give you an update on the Ramp Church and their development that's across from EC Glass, and then also some CDBG funds that have been leveraged to help the Salvation Army stand up and equip the shelter themselves. So very, very exciting, and I know that Kent, together with Chief Wormser and a myriad of Mr. Sellers, Ms. Watson, and several people have worked very hard on all this. Sarah Cordentoto, particularly, and I think I've sent you notes about that. Second of which is Mr. Tom Martin, our planning director, will engage you about the comprehensive plan. And this is a plan that under state code usually is offered every 10 to 15 years as the city will review its planning or zoning code. We're amidst that process now. We've employed a consultant. Those consultants have maybe spoken to many of you, and that those that they have not will. And that we have engaged the community. And so Tom, if anything, is going to give you an update on where we are in that process. Very important process. And then for the newer council members, I've maybe spoken to this to you about this in person, but we have two business item briefings this night. And what is a business item briefing? And if I say BIB, I'll try to stay away from acronyms, but we move quick sometimes and we call them BIBs. A BIB is it's an opportunity for city staff to engage you about a topic that you will vote upon eventually. Preferably not this evening, unless there's some kind of background with it or some kind of impending component. So no sooner have I given you an explanation of what a BIB, I'm going to use BIB in this circumstance, then we have the second of the two business item briefings tonight is about the curfew, the citywide youth curfew. So the curfew itself, we have engaged the previous city council about through our police chief and given data, and most recently came back and renewed it within, I think it was in our fall period, or maybe even before, just before the end of the summer. And each time that we've done so, we've offered data. We have the police chief, or one of his deputy chiefs tonight will be Mr. Edwards. Deputy Chief Edwards will engage you, as our chief is currently away with his family on a much-deserved vacation. And so why are we doing it this evening? We're doing it this evening because it has since lapsed. It lapsed as of January 1. There's an opportunity and I think interest possibly by the seven of you to look at extending it. This evening, you have that opportunity, and what we'll ask for is at the end, and I'll remind you that once Deputy Chief Edwards finishes his briefing, I'll look for a consensus, because we wanted, if anything, to see whether or not there was consensus to bring it forward to renew it. And what we're putting forward this time is a year extension. We've done 6-month increments previously. We had heard or understood that there was interest in a year. We will tell you that a year gives you an opportunity to get more data. And what we'll see sometimes, or not always is it borne out in the data that you see. The demonstrative thing is sometimes in the things you don't see where it has an impact. It's another, I think our Commonwealth's attorney talked about, or at least I know that the chief did, is another arrow in our quiver to kind of help curtail and create public safety. So that will be the opportunity during the business item briefing. We will have your roll call, and there are two items that are positioned for a closed session. The first of which I'm going to, I've talked to the mayor and to engage with city staff. We're going to, if it's okay with the members of city council, we're going to wait and have that briefing on the 28th of January at your next scheduled meeting. So I'll position or move from there. And Mayor, if it's okay, I have two pop-ups. And the first of which, I'm going to have Gaynell Hart, who is our Public Works Director. She and her team, I'll tell you that any one weather event has a myriad of folks that respond to it, not the least of which are Public Works, together with utilities, fleet, and others to help kind of make sure that we move things forward and keep the city safe. And I wanted to, reflecting on what we were hearing about what's happening in California, some of the things that happened in Richmond, I wanted, if anything, for Gaynell to talk about some of the experiences, some of the things that she and her team did, and do that quickly for you. So with that, Mr. Mayor, if it's okay, I have Gaynell Hart come forward. All right, thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of City Council. We just got through with 2 events on snow removal back to back and feel like it was fairly successful. For those that are new, we would like you to know that we've got a very detailed snow removal plan that actually we start planning in July and start making sure that we've got our chemicals in. We've got about 5,000 tons of salt we've got available. We update snow maps with new subdivisions, emergency contact list. We do equipment inspections, very thorough ones with fleet department to be sure our spreaders are ready. And we do training. We do snow rodeos and teach our guys how to run equipment. So we've got a very thorough plan. We also have a brine maker, and we're able to pre-treat our roads, which we did do for this snow removal. The purpose of the brine maker, we've got a 5,000-gallon tank, and the purpose of the brine is to prevent the snow from freezing to the road. And so it's a very important step, and it gives us a little jump ahead when it starts to snow. Obviously, we have not had a significant event in a number of years. So one of our major concerns, where we have a bunch of new staff and nobody had run these spreaders or plows, and it's one thing to run them on dry ground and to sit in them and mess with the controls, but when you're actually on roads trying to plow, it's slick, it's a whole nother ball game. Plus, when you're plowing at night, that changes how things are viewed. You get off the road, there's just so many things that can happen. And what we found out by doing a little bit of research was 42% of our drivers had 3 years or less experience. So in the past 3 years, we haven't had a lot of snow. So 42% of them just did not have a lot of experience. 25% were brand new this year, so they had no experience. So that was a major concern for us. And what that ends up, the lack of experience looks like is things like we forget to plow the middle lane, the turn lane of the road. For instance, we threw snow over the John Lynch Bridge on top of cars down at the pipe company. So we did things like that that people just aren't familiar with. But fortunately, we've got a lot of good leaders and people, senior people, running the shift that were able to help the guys along. On each shift, we got about 40 trucks out, 25 of which are spreaders. Our first event was actually began January 5th, but we actually came in the Saturday before. That's when we pre-wet the roads and actually did that all day Saturday. The event happened on January 5th. We brought the guys back in just a little early, got them back in the spreaders, used to the spreader controls again. We actually have 11 different spreader controls. So you could be assigned a truck, and then if your truck breaks down, you get assigned another truck. The controls are completely different. So we just wanted to do a little training to be prepared. So basically, it started snowing Saturday. We brought our spreader drivers in early. We always have a call with winter, and that includes police, fire, water resources, human services, the airport, schools, and communications and marketing. So we work as a team to work on the message, to be sure you're informed, and we're also informing the public. So that's been a huge help to me to have that support. So on Sunday, it started snowing. We ended up bringing plow drivers in. It started snowing around 5. The scary part of that snow was it was snow, sleet, and freezing rain. And the worst word is freezing rain, because definitely you're going to have electricity go out and you're going to have trees down. So we were fighting both of those on top of trying to fight the snow. The people in the plows are the same people that get the trees up. So that's something that sometimes you just have to stop and get the tree out of the road. So we work on primary and secondary until we get it clear and passable. Might be still have a little snow on it, but it needs to be passable. In other words, if you use some common sense, you can make it. We do not plow residentials until we get more than 2 inches of snow, which it was close, but we did get more than 2 inches of snow in each of these. So we did get in our residentials on the first snow by noon, which was a great help because we had some sun and we had some warming and we were able to do a fairly good job on those. We actually also contract with a landscaping contractor here that has smaller trucks with blades on them. Our trucks are fairly large. They can't get down the narrow inner city streets, and it's always been a complaint of citizens. We struggle to get down those. So they work in areas, they've got maps, and it's all organized. They've got maps in areas of Campbell Avenue, White Rock neighborhood, and Cabell Street neighborhood. So they work those neighborhoods, and we work all the rest of the city neighborhoods. It tends to be frustration with citizens over residential streets, and the reason is we do not salt the residential streets, so the snow binds itself to the pavement and it becomes icy and slick. And once it gets that way, there's almost nothing that we can do to plow it off with a plow. About all we can do is apply abrasives to try to help people get around. So we've been really diligent in trying to get on it quickly during the day where we can really start to make a difference there. That's typically our biggest complaints. Even the next snow, which is a much prettier and easier snow to work with, just a few inches of just plain snow, it felt good to have that experience under our belt and to be able to handle that fairly easily. Challenges on every snow, shifting forecasts. I mean, we went from 1 to 3 to 3 to 5, back to 1 to 3, and then it's rain, sleet, snow. It's very challenging to try to set your shifts and plan your plan, but it's just part of the job. Certainly low temperatures in this particular case was a problem. It'd be better if it was in mid-20s, upper 20s, but with it going into the teens, that really hurt us some. People, for some reason, even though they have a driveway, want to park their cars in the street when it snows, and that is a huge problem. It would really be helpful if citizens would park in their driveway, if they have one. Leave the road clear. We squeeze through a lot of places, but we also don't want to cause damage to a lot of people's vehicles. Another huge challenge is the weather before and after. If it's super cold the day before the snow, it's going to stick, and it's going to stick fast. Also, the weather after makes a big difference. If we get good temperatures and sun, that really helps us, and we look like heroes. There's other times it's super cold, it's cloudy, and then people really do complain. And it's just one of the things you got to learn to live with and deal with it the best that you can. Obviously, dealing with downed trees during this storm. And the last thing to kind of know about this is that the same trucks that do snow removal also do leaf collection. So every time we have to pull a truck off of leaf collection, we have to put the spreader on it, and it's off leaf collection. And then when we come back off of snow, we have to reload all the leaf equipment. So when we get snow in December, it's particularly disruptive to leaf collection and really holds us up. Fortunately, we were pretty much through with leaf collection. We've got piles out there that we know about. We're going to get back on, but certainly that is very disruptive. Overall, I felt like it went fairly well. Winter seemed to be pleased with it. Generally, people were pleased with it, and but just kind of by the numbers, we got 800 lane miles of streets that we plowed 2 or 3 times at least, if not 4 or 5 times during the snow. We applied 1,800 tons of salt or salt slag, 12,500 gallons of brine, over 200 labor hours, and that was just with streets. Snow removal actually encompasses a lot of things. It's water resources helps us with parking lots, bridge sidewalks at times, doing meals. We've got our custodians doing sidewalks, and we also have 24-hour fleet operations. They come in and help us and keep us going. So that is just public works labor hours. And then we had 24 down trees. And that's kind of a summary of these last 2 snows. Just know we have a plan, and we work our plan, and it's fairly detailed, and we certainly stay on top of it. So thank you. With that, I can answer questions.
Ms. Hart, I would like to commend you on your job. I was at the fueling station, I just stopped by, and you had a couple guys there fueling their vehicles. And the energy those guys had, they were smiling.
Yep.
And they said, Mr. Taylor, we got this.
Yeah.
And thank you.
Yeah, they were chomping at the bit to get to do snow. They were super excited about it.
Yes.
And yeah, hopefully it won't be a long winter. Thank you for that, though.
Yes. Yes, sir.
Thank you. One metric that I look at with this is the city of Lynchburg versus Bedford County. We have our kids back in school after 2 additional days off and then 1 late and 2-hour delay. Bedford County, they stayed out for 6 days. They didn't go back to school until today. So big difference. We nailed it. Thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
Because it's super important to keep the kids in school, especially after that Christmas break, and for you guys to be able to work around the clock and get that done and get the kids back in school. Great job.
Thank you.
Again, just echo again, thank you so much. You know, your team always works late hours, early hours, but we all in bed in our warm our houses. Your team is always out there working, make sure our streets are safe. So we always continue to appreciate you, the work that y'all do with public works, with whether it's a sewer situation or whatever the case may be, y'all always out there late at night. So thank you so much for keeping our city streets safe. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Gano. I did participate in the snow rodeo, and they gave me a shovel afterwards. They didn't want me to drive anything. Greg did much better than I did. The second pop-up, Mayor, you have before you, there's a document that I sent you earlier today. It's your fiscal 2026 budget calendar. And for those who are a bit more new on council, what this outlines is just when and how I'm going to propose the fiscal 2026 budget and the meetings that ensue from there. And you can see that we'll start with CIP in the latter part of February, and then in the beginning of March is usually the time in which that I stand up and I propose the city's fiscal year 2026 budget. Budget and brews, if you don't know, those are engagements with the community. I found in my tenure that it's been something that's been welcome, and participate, and you'll see that I try to, or attempt to, or at least the object is to meet with the residents in each one of the wards that we have. And then you can see that there are certain hearings. We have 3 of which are real estate assessment, the budget itself, real estate assessments, and water. And those are noticed. They're published with all the legal compliments as to when and time and what have you, and those are usually positioned. One of the things I want to draw your attention to, and I know that each of you have been interested in this, but and with that said, working with the mayor and also with the school board chair and with acting superintendent Dr. Copeland, who you met at your retreat this past Thursday. What I propose there is, so long as, and I just need consensus that it works, you're currently scheduled to have a work session on February the 11th. What I've proposed and seems to work for their schedules is a joint meeting. I know that there's an interest by both parties to understand mission, strategy, purpose moving forward. So it works for our calendars because you have a meeting, it works for their calendars. And we also have a spot available at Lynchburg Regional Business Alliance on Luckadoo. So Mayor, looking to you and your peers, just head nods consensus that February 11th be scheduled as a joint meeting with Lynchburg City Schools. We've gotten the head nods. So with that, I'll send a notice to our city clerk tomorrow, kind of scheduling as such. And if there's any other feedback that you may have about some of the dates or anything else, you're welcome to ring me up or shoot me an email or whatever works best for each of you. With that, Mayor, I turn it back to you.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Number 1 on our agenda is the Women's Center and sheltering update from Mr. Kent White.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Vice Mayor, members of City Council, Last year, city staff and the continuum of care were in front of you to talk about sheltering and to kind of provide a picture of that. So our goal today is really to just talk about what 2024 looked like, what some of the key actions that council and the community have taken to improve the situation, and kind of the next steps going forward into the year ahead. As a quick level set, just for one of the key takeaways you heard last year, overall in Central Virginia, what we know is that that homelessness overall is declining, but instances of unsheltered homelessness are increasing. And I have my colleague Olivia Brown-Coles from Miriam's House here. If you have any hard questions about this, certainly her agency does so much for our community in terms of addressing this. This issue. So just a recap, since 2019, we have unsheltered homelessness has increased 410%. So that's about 235 individuals who are unsheltered at any given time in our community. So said another way, we have more instances of people sleeping in tents, in cars, in other places, benches, in people's couches, than we do shelter beds or safe places, emergency shelter locations for our community. One of the main reasons is that there's been a decrease in shelter capacity. Since 2022, we've lost just shy of half of our shelter beds in Lynchburg. So as a result, how this is manifested is the city's Human Services Department and Fire Department have really worked with a number of community partners. Mr. Benda mentioned them, Salvation Army, Miriam's House, Interfaith Outreach, to stand up warming centers for our most vulnerable population during time. So last year, what that looked like was on 19 occasions, these groups came together to open up a place for people to sleep overnight, stay warm so they could get up and go to their jobs the very next day. Although this is not typically a city function, the Salvation Army used to do this for our provide this service for our community. They, in recent years, they haven't had the staff resources to do it, which has kind of created this need for other partners, including the city, to step in. Last January, we saw the number of unsheltered homeless increase from 8 to 39. So that kind of gives you some idea of the need. And then just last month in December, when the Salvation Army was Salvation Army's gym wasn't available, we stood up a smaller space in their chapel, and we maxed that capacity at 15 people regularly every night. Just for context, I'll tell you the one resident who stayed with, who was a guest there, was 77 years old. This operation was really only possible through our community's work. Again, Interfaith Outreach and Miriam's House provided, put lifelines out for the community volunteers to sign up. Salvation Army provided the space. And then these people that, these persons that Mr. Benda mentioned, Greg Wormser, Piper Vandepeer, Preston Sellers, April Watson, April Rowe, Anna Benson, they're meeting every single day ahead of a weather event to figure out what the overnight temperature is going to be. Do we have volunteers sign up to serve? An overnight shelter is about 21 individuals. So where are all those volunteers coming from? And then are the resources available? Do we have sufficient donations to the Salvation Army so folks have coffee and water and things like that to operate on these cold nights? Each time we do the shelter, we do a quick after action, and we get a few lessons learned out of that. Some things of note, about a third of the residents who are guests with us at the shelter are not part of the homeless response system. In other words, they haven't been homeless or they haven't needed services during that time. So again, the cold temperatures, rightly so, you see really brings out individuals in a time of need. The other thing is that the center has accomplished connecting people with resources in our community, which is a key piece of this, connecting with these community entities that we do. And the third thing is consistency matters. Being able to operate a warming center with some regularity, with a clear understanding of what the hours are, what the timing is, because this is often a difficult population to be able to reach. We have, for those of you who are newer to council, we have street outreach teams staffed by volunteers of all this who go in throughout places to comb our city to make sure people are aware that this resource is available. The other thing I want to highlight is the action that council took last year. You took three really significant actions around addressing the unsheltered homeless population. One, you approved community development block grant funding specifically to provide Miriam's House and the Continuum of Care with a homeless intake and access service. What that is basically a one-stop shop with a primary goal of helping to keep people from becoming situationally homeless, whether that's working with landlords, whether that's working with resources in the community. But of course, the key step is to keep people in their home or in their place of shelter for some period of time when at all possible. The second thing is you allocated direct funding for Miriam's House and the Continuum of Care to solicit a nonprofit partner to operate the warming center. And we'll talk a little more about what that looks like in a minute. And then the last thing is you approved a zoning petition for a new community partner to operate a shelter at a vacant church on Memorial Avenue. And Mr. Benda mentioned that's the Ramp Church. The funds you allocated for the low barrier shelter were awarded to the Salvation Army, and they were actually the only applicant for the Continuum of Care's request for proposals process, because we know this is really difficult work, and again, many hands applied to this. The other thing is that the center has been operating just this year since January 4th, and it's been operating continuously. City staff and volunteers had to assist for a couple days. Ironically, the weather and the holidays created some issues with the Salvation Army being able to sign the agreements to be able to allow the use of that space. But once they did, they've been operating it continually in that time, and that's directly through that funding you provided through community development block grants. Really great news out of that. They have been able to reopen the gym. What that basically means is more beds, more cots, about 40 spaces. They're averaging about 20 people a night last week, and what we're hearing is that number is growing as people realize that the center is open every night. The other key thing is that they're operating at a temperature threshold of 32 degrees. And the difference there is when community volunteers and the city stand this up, we're in the low 20s. It's an emergency situation. This really speaks more to getting people a safe space when the temperatures reach freezing or below. And then the last thing is, of course, you just heard from Ms. Hart about the winter weather. Of course, that creates transport issues for our entire community and our volunteers. So Salvation Army has provided some daytime warming services for folks to be able to move out of the gymnasium into their cafeteria or other safe places during the day on really cold days. We're still in January. We've got a long ways to go through this winter, as Ms. Hart said. Hopefully we'll get to the end of this soon. And we're carefully monitoring this funding, monitoring our resources. But I will say that there is hope on the horizon. The Refuge at Memorial, that's the Ramp Church, they have experienced some construction delays over the winter months. That's not uncommon. And the latest we heard, Physical Development Committee just heard earlier that their goal is to open their first phase in February, which would add about 15 beds to our community. And then over the next year, our community partners are really trying to seek out resources for that consistent operation that we're talking about. We're always looking to reevaluate what our inventory and what our resources are. But again, set hours, opening early in the season, as we just have talked about with December really was taxing on our volunteers and our community, and being able to provide that operation is key, I think, for Lynchburg. So with that, happy to answer any questions you may have, and I appreciate your time.
Are there any questions for Mr. White? Mr. Wilder?
Thank you again for all the work you've done for the for the Social Service Department, Mr. Preston, and all the others that work with that, all your staff, to work in that warming center. It's amazing to see that come through and that notified, community where those warming centers are. And just also, if you need any additional space, I'm always going to use the Jubilee Gym. Just let me know if you need that facility. And we do have showers as well. So just as long as we have some support helping the staff or whatever, make sure it's adequately supervised properly. The building is always there. Usually, if it's a bad storm, we don't use it anyway. So we can always have some space if you need. Just let me know. But again, I just appreciate how the community comes together to make sure our community is safe. And I love to see that. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Anyone else? Thank you, Mr. White. Next on our agenda is comprehensive plan update. Ms. Rachel Fleshausen.
Thank you, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of council. Good afternoon. I'm here today to give you an update on, and just let you know how we're progressing on our city's comprehensive plan update so far. To start with a little bit of background, since maybe we want to refresh our memories, and for the new council members as well, thought we could start with the basics, kind of the what, the why, and the how. So what is a comprehensive plan? In short, it's a long-range, high-level planning document, and it addresses things like land use, development, natural environment, transportation, and other subjects. It's an official adopted public policy document that provides long-range policy direction. It's our goal that our plan articulate the community's vision for where we want to be in 20-plus years, and it includes strategies to achieve that vision, because the plan serves as a decision-making guide for changes to our natural and built environment. A prime example of this would be the items that I'm normally presenting to you at City Council. So land use decisions. We use the comprehensive plan as a resource to determine whether the request at hand aligns with our comprehensive plans, goals and visions. So that factors into the recommendation for approval or denial. Additionally, the plan itself is also used as the basis for our regulatory tools, like our zoning ordinance and subdivision ordinance. So the distinction there is the plan itself is not code or an ordinance, but it is the foundation for those ordinances. And why do we update it? Of course, the answer is because communities are not static. They change over time, and their goals can change as well. But also, and maybe more importantly, the city's authority and responsibility to develop a plan comes from our state code, which dictates much of what needs to go into the plan, how we adopt it, and specifically, state code requires that we review it every 5 years, and it mandates the things like transportation, development, land use, community facilities, those elements of the plan. And so what is the process? There are 3 phases to the update, starting with the initial phase of community input and data gathering. And we then take that information from the first phase and move into plan drafting, where we capture what we learned and put that into written form. And when all the chapters have been drafted and reviewed, we'll move to the reviewing and refining phase, which will include another round of community feedback on the final draft, review by VDOT, which is also required by state code, and then public hearings with Planning Commission and City Council leading up to the adoption of the plan. So here's a graphic representation of that process. You can see the phases listed up top with the more detailed steps below that show you kind of what tasks we're executing with each phase. The little red arrow shows where we are now, which is right in the middle of drafting and reviewing the text with Planning Commission. It's a little deceiving because this phase looks like it's the shortest, but it takes the longest because there is a lot to cover. So this is an outline of the plan, kind of giving you an idea of how the plan's going to be laid out and showing which sections have been covered with Planning Commission so far. The strike through indicating which sections we've talked about, and the light blue will be covered in future work sessions. And speaking of the future, our next steps. We're continuing on with our 5 work sessions with Planning Commission. We have 3 completed and 2 more to go. We'll also be scheduling interviews with our newer members of council as your schedules allow in the near future. So be on the lookout for that communication from us. Our goal is to have a complete plan draft available to the public in May in anticipation of public hearings late summer to early fall of next year. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any questions from council? Mr. Wallace?
The question, you know, when we talk about to our community, do we invest also talk to our stakeholders like Liberty University? I know they had a lot of growth with need for housing, need of nature, and a lot of growth in Ward 3 and Ward 4. Do we talk with the management there to see what their thoughts are, to see how they're working with the planning commission or how that might work?
So they would have been engaged in our focus group phase, which would be back in phase 1, kind of data gathering. We had, several focus areas, and now the bullet is hiding somewhere in my notes. But we had, economic development, education, development, housing, a number of different,
So they would have been included in that group?
right,
Okay.
correct.
Dr. Wilder, Mr. Mayor, if it's okay. Dr. Wilder, to your question, I think it is through the EDA and through other elements to make sure that that the community understands to the degree, like you said, where we've seen growth, or maybe where maybe developers, I know that Kent and Margette and planning have been very intentional about our developers as to where they're moving, and if they're into areas that we haven't seen growth. I mean, one of the ones that we've seen has been over off Bedford Avenue, that there's been a tremendous amount of investment there. We've seen off Ford Avenue that there's been some recent growth over there. And so to the degree that we are hearing from them about where they want to move, and because they've gone into a space, sometimes what's important is that feedback that we've gotten, and usually it's a very wide and broad communication that's given to make sure that we get the greatest amount of feedback to ensure that when we get to blue, I'm going to say Tar Heel blue, and maybe that'll get in trouble with some folks, but Tar Heel blue, that when we get there, we've really made sure everyone's had an opportunity to engage. But this is that moment too, and I'll make this pitch here, and that as it goes out, that to the degree that you want to participate, there are ways through the city website to get in touch with city staff and myself about ways that you can offer your feedback here.
You know, the biggest thing also is developers, because so many times they'll start working on a project and it's not zoned properly. They'll try to get the zone changed, and just make sure there's some communication ahead of time, and make sure they know, just before they do too much investment, that they're talking with the city staff before they make a large investment, and see what the potential for changing the zone if possibly needed. But just make sure we listen to our developers and what they're saying in our community, and what some of the hurdles they may have or come across, to make sure they're part of the conversation.
Yep. Very important dialogue.
Ms. Timlin?
This is more of a technical question as I start to understand jurisdiction information as far as communication flow. But what's the relationship between the future land use map and the comprehensive plan, and how those interact with each other?
So the future land use map is typically considered part of your comprehensive plan.
Okay.
So that is something that will be evaluated as part of this.
Okay,
as well.
thank you.
Mr. Michigan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So just to be clear, I'm looking at the community engagement survey on the Lynchburg Together website. And is that correct, that we only had 257 people participate in the survey?
We did, and it is hard to get people interested in a survey sometimes. And so that is where some of our other avenues for participation come into play as well. There's also an interactive map on the website where you can drop pins to talk about maybe physical areas that need a change or you see potential for. So there's the map. There were also public workshops that were held during phase 1. We held those at 4 elementary schools here around the city to kind of have an in-person facilitated discussion. We also tagged along with the budget team when they were doing their budget engagement kind of pop-ups. And then we did the focus groups as well. So bringing all that together is what the community input looks like. And if anyone feels like they missed out on the front half, there is an opportunity at, once the final plan is put together, we will be having some form of open house event for the plan itself, and then there will be an online way to comment as well.
Got it. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.
Mr. Dingman?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I heard an acronym, EEA. Can you give me a little fill-in on what EEA is?
Excuse me, Economic Development Authority.
EDA.
EDA, I'm sorry.
I thought it was a new one. I didn't.
No, it's, I should try to stay away from the acronyms, but yes, it's our Economic Development Authority.
Thank you.
Are there any more questions from Ms. Fleischer? No? Go to the next item. Business item briefing. Yeah, she gonna stay here.
Yes.
2810 Campbell Avenue, conditional use permit, multi-family dwelling. This item will appear before council for action on January 28, 2025. Ms. Rachel Fleshhauser.
Thank you again, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of council. As mentioned, the purpose of this CUP, or conditional use permit, to not use an acronym, is to allow the use of an existing structure as a 3-unit multifamily dwelling in a B1 limited business district at 2810 Campbell Avenue. Planning Commission recommended approval of this petition on December 11th, 2024. A city council public hearing will be held on January 28th. The subject property is zoned B1 limited business. In this zoning district, multifamily dwellings are permitted upon approval of a conditional use permit from City Council. Our future land use map recommends mixed use for the property. These areas don't fit into any single land use category and are intended to be a balanced mix of residential, neighborhood, commercial, civic uses, and other types. The subject property contains a 1-story wood frame structure with approximately 1,500 square feet. It was previously used for commercial purposes. I believe it was last used as a hair salon. It is adjoined by residential uses and parking. The property has been partially converted to the proposed residential units at this point. Work to convert the building was taking place when a stop work order was issued on June 28th of 2024. At the time of that stop work order, 2 dwelling units had been installed and a 3rd unit was in progress. So the units that were constructed without permits would be subject to applicable building code requirements if this were to be approved. The use of the existing building as a 3-unit multifamily dwelling should have limited impact on the surrounding area. Approval of the CUP petition should not negatively impact. It would allow the 2 additional residential units without altering the zoning, since single-family homes are permitted in this district. And it would preserve the opportunity for future commercial uses to occupy the space, since the zoning would not change with the conditional use permit. So again, this item will return for a city council public hearing on January 28th. Thank you.
Are there any questions for Mr. Ferrari?
Thank you for your presentation. It's my understanding for the minutes that there were 3 commissioners missing from this discussion. Can we get some insight on that if possible?
Sure. I know a couple of them had family-type health emergencies.
Okay.
So that would account for 2.
Certainly, thank you. Do we have other examples in this corridor or area, or city for that matter, where we've taken essentially a storefront and done this?
None is coming to mind at the moment.
Okay.
I can do a little research and
I'd be
digging
curious.
to see, but none at the moment.
Okay, and this is more of just a pet peeve that I've raised ever since my predecessor was raising it, and I've continued the tradition, so might as well start fresh with a new term. I hate the fact that we put residential in a B1 zone. It makes no sense to me. It's not a business, but we do it. So to bring parity to the comprehensive plan conversation, if that could be roped in, I know I included that with my one-on-one with the consultants. It's just a personal thing. I know it's just a label, but labels should mean something. I can't stand it, so it's just, anyway, thank you.
Mr. Mish?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks for your presentation. The only concern that I have about this particular project is looking at the building. There is not a lot of egress on that, and I have concerns about ensuring that they're going to be making the modifications necessary to get egress for life safety reasons out of that building, switching it to residential. I would think that, downtown, we might be able to consider, we've turned plenty of storefront type
True.
business buildings into residential would be the only thing that would be similar that I can think of. But that's just my concern, is to make sure that we're looking at those aspects to ensure that we have that egress.
Absolutely, and that was part of the reason the condition was placed on there, that any any units in the building would be retroactively reviewed to make sure they meet building code, because safety is the most important thing, of course.
Yeah, I mean, it looks to me like, I mean, there's no windows, hardly. And you've got to have, a way for people to get out.
Right.
And you've also got to have a way for people to get in. So it's dangerous both to the people inside the building and then also the firefighters if something happened.
Sure.
Mr. Wilder?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Did it require any comments from the neighbors, or did they receive notice about any changes to the property?
We require, we always notify the neighbors as required by our zoning ordinance, which is to notify adjoining owners by mail. And then, of course, there's a sign placed at the property line to advise anyone who's interested of the public hearing. We didn't get any phone calls that I'm aware of, or speakers at the planning commission meeting.
And I see in the notes that they plan to make the site look more like a residential property. I see that. And also, is a lot of mixed houses and businesses on that corridor of Campbell Avenue. So it's kind of a different kind of setting, because it's a house here, a storefront there. So it's kind of mixing the whole strip. Okay, thank you.
Any more questions for Ms. Fleischansky? Thank you.
Thank you.
Item number 4, citywide curfew. Deputy Chief Ken Edwards.
Good afternoon, Mayor Taylor, Vice Mayor Deemer, and all members of council. Happy New Year to you. Make sure I get this going right. Yes. So I come before you this afternoon regarding the recommendation to establish a citywide youth curfew effective February 17th, 2025, which will automatically expire and be repealed on February 18th, 2026 without further action. This request is made because the most recent curfew expired on January 1st, 2025. The Lynchburg Police Department's been collecting data on the curfew since it began on May 26, 2023. As of December 31st, 2024, 49 individuals have been charged with violating the curfew. The citywide curfew continues to provide another tool for officers to address delinquent behavior by reducing the likelihood of juvenile involvement in criminal activities during late night hours. It also helps prevent our youth from becoming victims of crimes such as assaults or robberies, which are more likely to occur at night. Got a couple of charts here. The first one is juvenile offenders of property crime and violent crime, and this is during the curfew hours, 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. As you see, in 2024, we had 1 juvenile charged with aggravated assault, 4 with larcenies, 3 motor vehicle thefts, and 3 sexual assaults. And the next one here is juvenile victims of property crime and violent crime during the curfew hours, which we had 4 victims of aggravated assault, 5 larcenies, 2 robberies, and 8 sexual assaults during 2024. And I'll be glad to take any questions anyone may have.
Mr. Ferrari?
Thank you, sir. You cite in your presentation that 49 individuals have been cited, or, excuse me, arrested. Was that your term? Charged?
Yes, charged. It's a class 4 misdemeanor. That's a summonsable offense.
Do we have a number of people who were actually, that was enforced on? They were found guilty of it?
I do not have the number as far as ultimate disposition of those cases, no.
Of those 49, how many have been since January of 2024?
May have that. I do not, but I can tell you it was only a handful in
It's 3.
2024. Okay, 3. Yep, that sounds about right.
Can I have some more explanation as to why the recommendation is to extended from 6 months to 1 year?
I think it helps with collecting data. It certainly allows us to have a year to do this instead of every 6 months. You know, with the curfew, our officers, if they see a young person under the ages of 18 out during those hours, they can stop and detain them based on suspicion of violating the curfew. And with that, without the curfew, then it's merely, certainly if an officer sees a young person out between those hours of 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. without the curfew, they may get out with them, they may not. But if they do, it's strictly voluntary. It's a consensual police encounter at that point. And if they don't have anything else to detain that person, well then the person really does not have to stay with the officer and identify themselves.
Forgive me, I forget your rank. Is it Deputy Chief?
Yes.
Deputy Chief, okay. Deputy Chief, my rebuttal would be, that's great, but if in the last year we've only had 3 data points, digging into the data more, I appreciate you sharing the types of crime between certain time periods, but the data we've been showed shows 1 person cited and stopped since January of 2024. 3 total have been stopped, but only 1 person was stopped and cited. 1 vehicle since January of 2024, and only 1 firearm since January of 2024. So how much data are you expecting to get?
Well, I would say most young people between those hours of 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. are where they should be at night. There's a portion of young people who are not, and but it could also lead us to believe that the curfew is working and that we are getting compliance. I mean, there's one case of the stolen firearm, the firearm you're referring to. That was a case that even involved a young person from outside the jurisdiction of Lynchburg that was not going to come into the city because of the curfew to engage in that transactions. So I think it, you know, you could read the numbers either way, but I think the numbers also show that we have overall compliance with the curfew.
It is worth noting for the record that that 1 firearm was obtained in May of 2023. So again, what I'm just trying to point out is I've never supported this. I don't like the idea of government telling parents when their children should or should not be wearing a mask, or when they should or should not be in their home. That's the job of the guardian or parent. If we're gonna add a year to this, it only makes it worse. It only gives a worse taste in my mouth. If someone's acting up, regardless if it's 11 a.m. or 10 p.m., if they're white, black, 13 or 31, if they're breaking the law, we stop them. So I don't see what more date, if the reason behind extending it for a year and to continue this curfew is argued because of we want more data. The last year has not shown that you're getting more data. If you want to continue it because you think it's working, then tell us. But I don't believe the data warrants another year, because there isn't any to show that we're actually, the people we're arresting, are they being cited? Are they being charged? That's the information I'm looking for. Furthermore, I
think the overall goal of the curfew is to assist, youth in who might be at risk of becoming offenders or victims of crime during those hours.
Do you say it
Not solely the data, but it's also it's to protect our young people. If they're offenders, hold them accountable. And we also
I certainly understand the intent, and I don't besmirch that. But I was taught by Dr. Verdon in Government 1 something in college, intent is wonderful. But in practice, this is the local government stepping forward and saying, we know better than the parents, and we're going to put our foot down. I've long said, I see no difference between a mask, and I see no difference between a curfew. They're the one and the same. So I vehemently disagree. I know some of my colleagues feel differently. I don't want to take too much of the time here, but for the purposes of the record, data can be manipulated all sorts of ways, and I don't mean to damage the integrity of what was presented, but it is important to note that while, yes, we may have gotten one firearm, that was a year and a half ago. That was or now probably farther, and some other data points that was shared. So I'll turn it over to my colleagues, but I will not be supporting this. I have a record of opposing it, and I would encourage my colleagues to empower our officers to enforce the laws in the books and not create more. Thank you.
Dr. Wilder?
Thank you for the information. I really appreciate it. And thank you for your efforts in making our community safe and our streets safe. Have we received any negative comments from parents or community leaders, such as community advocate groups, about the impartiality of this particular ordinance or being unfair to certain persons in our community?
No, sir. It's actually been supported throughout the community.
Okay,
Yes.
right. I do appreciate it because I do, I had some feeling at the beginning, but I do understand that our police department do need more tools in their toolkit. Just as the housing development portion where we do blight property and other situations, it just gives us more tools in our toolkit to address certain issues and challenges in our community. I understand the part about parents and supervision of their children. Again, like in school system, I mean, some parents just do not go to PTA meetings or don't make sure that children are doing their homework in school or go to school consistently. So we have to have certain things in place to address those issues. So again, I mean, sometimes I appreciate the parents' role, but again, sometimes, unfortunately, some parents have certain challenges that they may have. So I appreciate the community kind of having some measures in place to make sure all of our kids are safe, or kind of give them another measure to make sure they're off the streets at a certain time period. That the police force can step in and say, we have this document or this issue on our books where we can address these issues where kids are being out at night at 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock in the morning. So we do have something, a toolkit that can address that when the parents sometimes don't even know kids have snuck out of the house. So again, it gives us another toolkit. So I do appreciate it. Since we haven't received any negative feedback from community members, from community partners, from community stakeholders, they haven't said anything negative about it. So I am in favor of it. I'm favor to continue the process if it continues to see some improvement, see some work, and also just gives our police department additional toolkit and their resources that we can address issues in our community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mitchell?
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your presentation, Deputy Chief. Have we seen or observed any change since the curfew expired as far as juveniles being out in those curfew hours? Do you know if that's
Have we
something?
seen what, sir?
Have your officers seen or encountered, more juveniles out? I know it's been cold, but has that been something that's been observed since the curfew expired?
Since the curfew's been in place, we've observed fewer. Of course, there are allowances in the ordinance for juveniles to be out during those curfew hours, but and then we've also had like former mayor's midnight basketball initiative where there were allowances for that, but by and large, no, I think there's been a decrease in juveniles out during those hours, and by and large, most juveniles are where they're supposed to be at night anyway. It's a portion. Now, when it comes to some of our crimes, like for example, property crimes, larcenies from vehicles, I don't have data to support it, but I would estimate that a good portion of those larcenies from vehicles are committed by juveniles, by individuals under the age of 18, which having the curfew in place is another tool for us to use to combat that at night, because most of those larcenies from vehicles are occurring at night.
And that's kind of what I'm getting at with the question is I'm not asking you for what the hard numbers say. I'm asking you for what your instincts as how many years? 20 plus, 30 plus?
28. Next month will be 28.
28 was actually my guess. So 28 years. What are your instincts? If you're going to go out and patrol, and what does it tell you? Is it working? Is it making a difference? Is it keeping your officers safer? Is it keeping our community safer? And that's kind of what I'm asking you to speak to. But I think you might have missed one part of that, which is the curfew expired, I think was it New Year's Eve? When did it expire?
January 1st, yes, sir.
January 1st?
Yes, sir.
So since the curfew's expired, I know it's only been a couple weeks, have we seen people starting to come out at night?
Have
since
not
it's
seen an
expired?
increase. That may be due to the weather. It also may be due to, it's not well known that it actually expired January 1st either.
So that's probably not something to broadcast. And I could absolutely understand why it would go for a year instead of 6 months, because ending this in the middle of the summer would be not something to do, because when the kids aren't in school, they're going to be up late, they're going to be out late, and we all know that we have a lot more crime in the summer, especially at nighttime. So that's probably a good reason for it to go on for a year. I supported this the first time. I voted against it the second time. But I've heard from a lot of people in the community that want this, parents that want this. I received just yesterday, and I forwarded a message to Dr. Wilder about a mother who was absolutely terrified for her 17-year-old son getting lost to the street. And I forwarded that message to Dr. Wilder and asked him to get him plugged into Jubilee and you know, to contact the mother, because he's got the resources over there to do that, because that's what we need to do. You know, we need to get in touch with these parents that have these concerns and keep these kids busy. Got 4 boys. If they're not busy, they're in trouble. That's how it goes, right? And I get it, and I also understand the constitutional side of this as well, and the parental rights side of this. If I got to send one of my kids out at night, you know, I can hand a note to them and say, here you go. Here's my phone number. If you get stopped, have the officer call me. I'll vouch for it, right? So I think that's a way out with that as well. So I mean, your gut. What's your gut tell you? What do your instincts tell you? Is this a good thing? Is this something that helps us? Does it keep us safe?
Yes. My gut instinct is that it helps us. It helps keep the community safe. And again, it's another tool that we're able to use. And yes, I think it worked, and it has the potential to continue working. And it's known in other surrounding jurisdictions of the city that we have it in place. So, and that's considered.
Keep their bad apples out of here too. That's always a good thing.
Absolutely.
And then the second part of this, you know, just something to keep in mind, and I know I've discussed this with the mayor, is, you know, truancy. What we're doing with truancy, I think, is something we need to look at with the school board and see how we can potentially examine that. You know, a lot of these kids that are getting in trouble, from what I'm hearing, that they're not going to school, right? So what do we need to do to enforce that better? Do we need something stronger there as well? And that would be obviously something with the school board. It may be something we could discuss at the joint meeting with the school board. So keep in mind, I guess, as a department, you guys could start thinking about that, talk to the police chief, and see if there's maybe something out there that we can try to encourage the school board to do to also help keep our citizens safer. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Tillman?
Thank you, Deputy Chief. Greatly appreciate both your time and service and time in the presentation tonight. My comments are actually more so directed towards council and possibly towards the city attorney a little bit, in the context of the curfew and the really 2 key areas that I have questions, maybe a third secondary area. The first has to do with language around the parents, and it's in section C, where it talks about the language, or the language is essentially encouraging or allowing and or permitting, and that is the parents in relationship to the minor that is breaking the curfew. Personally, I would be a lot more comfortable with the language, parents who facilitate a minor breaking the curfew, as opposed to encouraging or allowing, simply in the context of, you can have a conversation with a minor that is a lot bigger than you, and he's going to say, I'm headed out, and what's that mother going to do? assumes a lot in the context of that relational dynamic and the conversations taking place. So if a parent is facilitating, that's a very different conduct as opposed to an exchange that happens in a conversation and then the minor leaves. I think that would help with a little bit of ambiguity. Yeah,
Councilmember Timmer, if I could just offer some insight on.
thank you.
So, excuse me. So a lot of this revolves around also common sense of law enforcement. So I imagine in a hypothetical like that, if you have a parent who's saying, look, you know, I tried to tell them not to go out, they're much bigger than I am, or they snuck out, said they snuck out in the middle of the night. In my mind, the law enforcement officer would have the discretion to say, look, you know, I'm not going to charge the parent in this particular instance, but I may charge the minor in that instance for doing that. So that language, it's certainly, if council as a body wants to modify it, we can. But I don't think there has been any particular issue with how it's being worded. Really, the goal in that is to prevent, like you had said, the parent from allowing and facilitating the minor from going out at night. What law enforcement is likely going to be looking for is where parents either just don't care or they're simply allowing them to go out blatantly in violation of the rule of the curfew.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I do think that the tightening of the language would be helpful, and I am not an attorney, but with just a very cursory look at some of the case law around curfews, it's largely been in the area of ambiguity of language. I don't know if we want to discuss that further. I do have a second point of concern. Okay. And that is the time frame. So I'm not directly opposed to the curfew itself per se, but I don't think it is a tool that is meant to be a long-term tool with my understanding of what curfews are and how they've been applied legally in the past. And so I do have strong concerns about a 12-month time frame, both just personally and legally. And Dr. Wilder, I have received a concern from a community member who's actively involved in troubled youth that has concerns about some of the implications of not so much how the curfew has been applied, but how it has impacted certain youth in the community. And I haven't had a long discussion with this gentleman yet, but it has come to my attention. So with that, I do think that a more limited time frame, I think ideally 3 months, I'd be open to the 6 months, but with that so that we can look at other avenues to address some of these concerns where there's more direct correlation or causation as opposed to something that is a little bit more vague and ambiguous in its actual impact on the community. That would be my personal thoughts on that.
Ms. Reed?
So we have to remember the origin of the curfew for our newcomers here. This came out of the death of 3 children, as I recall. We lost 3 young people in as many months the year that the curfew took place, that we enacted it. We lost a 13-year-old girl, Malaysia, and then Terrion the next month, a 16-year-old, and then Kingston, a 6-year-old. And the community outcry was overwhelming. Overwhelming. Because those 3 children died in the same part of the city. We were asked for this curfew by those community members because their children were dying. So we honored our community members who asked us to help protect their children. And we listened because that's our job. And when it expired, they asked us to renew it, to continue to protect their children. And we honored our law enforcement community and the wisdom and their experience because they said it's the right thing to do. regardless of the numbers we saw on the data, with the data, because our citizens asked us to do whatever it took for the children of our city. So we haven't heard a lot of negative feedback at all. I've had parents more inconvenienced with the fact that their kids have to be in an hour earlier. Well, go talk to Malaysia's family and Terrion's family and Kingston's family if you're inconvenienced, and see how they feel. The language doesn't bother me at all, hasn't come up. No disrespect to your concerns, but it hasn't come up. I think we have to continue to remember the origin of the curfew. If our chief, our deputy chief, and our officers are saying, hey, we feel like it's potentially working and keeping a lot of our youth from being out of the community and either victimizing or becoming victims, I say we continue to do what it takes to keep our youth safe, because that's what we were asked to do when this curfew first came up. If we get advised from our law enforcement professionals that, hey, it's no longer working, we don't feel like it should be in place, it's no longer serving its purpose, if we hear an overwhelming pushback from the citizens we represent in droves, then I think that's when we reconsider. But I don't think anybody up here, unless someone wants to correct me, is going to tell me that we have dozens and dozens of calls and emails from people saying, shut it down. And we once again have a great presentation saying, our law enforcement experts are saying, we think the best thing to do is to continue it. That's all I have to say.
Mr. Dean?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for your presentation, Deputy Chief Ken Edwards. I really appreciate the data and the facts. That's what drives my decision on this, and I am going to be supporting the year extension. I think you've collected the data, and that was the work that you did, and I appreciate that work. I know that wasn't easy. I have one question. Were any parents ever charged with the part of the code?
Parents have been charged. As
Do you have a number?
They're
How
part of
many
that total number. No,
general?
but I can get the number to the city manager,
Yeah,
give it to you.
Convictions and charges, I'd be curious, just like Councilman Feraldi, about the results of that. Typically, my political leanings can go very libertarian, so I do have a concern when government, like Councilman Feraldi says, tries to tell parents how to raise their children. However, I think one thing that you failed to mention that speaks loudly to voting for this is that this is a toolkit for you, but as a parent of 7, I can tell you it's also a toolkit for parents, and I think I've heard from parents who were very clear that they appreciated having this in their toolkit, and they were successfully using this to help them parent. And something that's also, I think, not come up in this discussion is the number of parents who have been successful. It's hard to measure something like that. You can't collect that in the data, but I think we have given them a tool, and I think they are using it, and I think anecdotally, it certainly appears to be working in every way I can see. There was a gang that came through my neighborhood out off Leesville Road a few years ago before the curfew, all underage, all would have been breaking the curfew, 3 a.m. in the morning, and they went through 50-plus cars, and they got a gun, or at least I think they may have got 3 guns. Y'all did find them and prosecute, and I appreciate it. They didn't get anything out of my car because I had some motion lights that made them run. But I can tell you that smash and grab is the #1 crime when I was up in Richmond, and it's probably up at the top of the crimes in our area. And folks just need to be aware to keep their doors locked and don't keep valuables in a car, especially guns. I'm highly against that. But I do want to just state that I am going to support this curfew for another year. I know we've done 6-month increments, and I'd be fine with 6 months, but if folks want a year, I will support that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans.
Thank you.
Mayor, no, go ahead.
Just one quick question before we begin, when I know the city manager was going to ask. Is there any appetite from the body as a majority to change C from knowingly permit, allow, or encourage to knowingly facilitate, allow, or encourage?
Mr. Mission.
I would support that change. I think that's a good change.
Okay, so that's two. Is there two others?
I would support that change.
All right? Three.
Sometimes we get so caught up in little words. I have no problem. I'd rather leave it the same. But again, we can just debate with the wording we've been here so many times with that. But again, we haven't had a problem with it over the past 2 years, but okay. But again,
For what it is worth, from a statutory language standpoint, it's helpful from a parent's standpoint that it has the word knowingly. So the thing is that there, in my mind, speaks to the parent is knowingly allowing the child to be after the curfew. So from an enforcement standpoint, it might be a little bit of splitting hairs, but you could. It's whatever council's pleasure is if they prefer to have it as permit or facilitate.
We can allow the language.
Change to facilitate? Okay. All right, that's what we'll do.
Mayor, with that, just looking for consensus to put it under general business this evening?
Wait a minute, no, absolutely not.
Okay.
I mean, we're going to vote on an ordinance that presumably new members of council have had maybe 4 days to review, and then the public sees we're going from 6 months to a year, and now we're changing language, albeit favorable, I think, and we're going to vote on it in less than 2 hours. I don't think that's appropriate.
Absolutely, and if I wasn't clear, in my opening remarks, I had shared that we were in this instance previously where it had lapsed. And that, in that circumstance, and again, because I was given kind of the definition of a business item briefing, and that what we do is we do not put you in a circumstance or a position to vote on something the same evening. And that was not my intent, and will not be my intent in doing this. What I'm modeling is that when we had briefed this to begin with, because this is now our third renewal, I believe. When we first briefed this, we gave the overview, and again, I can see the differences being a different body and what have you, just as you cited, Mr. Feraldi. The second time that we did this, because it had lapsed, we did do this circumstance where it was to put it on as a business item briefing without the assumption about there being a general business item being voted upon. There was consensus then to bring it forward as a general business. I, in my remarks earlier, if I wasn't clear, was positioning it as the same. And the reason I'm doing that, or had offered that, was it had lapsed as of January 1. I had heard that there was a vote, it becoming, I think Ken or Mate, was it you, Mr. Freeman? It said it becomes viable as of February the 17th. That's correct. And I in no way want to put anybody in a circumstance where they feel pushed or pressured. So if it's just a procedural component and that we can bring it forward on the 28th, and that it wouldn't begin any earlier or sooner because of the circumstance of how it's laid out, then we can certainly go with what you're offering. I was under the understanding that, because considering it had lapsed, went with what was modeled before, was going to see where the body was as far as putting under general business. You raise good points, and I don't want to put anybody in a position that it's too soon, too early. And that's why when I heard earlier that it becoming effective at a certain date in February, that was something that was new. I didn't know that it wouldn't be effective the day that it was adopted.
That's right. So because the ordinance repealed and because there's a penalty, that requirement you see in there for the delayed effective date is related to a charter requirement we have that speaks to an advertisement requirement for ordinances that impose certain penalties on the public. So if we were not to consider it this evening, we would have to move the effective date to a little bit later to account for the minimum of 30 days of the pamphlet publication. Now, City Council's that's somewhat of a crossroads here. So Councilman Feraldi has brought up good points. There is the option to be able to hear additional data from the Lynchburg Police Department, to look at the ordinance with the revised language under that subsection C specific to parents, or alternatively, council does have the option to put this to a vote, but to do so, it would have to suspend its rules of procedure to have it on the agenda this evening to consider that as a vote. So really, it's however you all want to proceed as a body.
Mayor, oh, sorry.
Mr. Mitchell?
So I guess a couple things. First thing is, let's take you out of the crosshairs,
Okay.
because you asked for the consensus and you didn't get it. So if I'm correct on this, we could actually vote, so long as we had a supermajority, to vote on putting this on the agenda. According to our current rules of procedure, we could actually have a vote as if
I think
five
that's
of us said, hey, let's vote right here, right now in this work session. So it would take 5 of us to say, we're going to vote, and then it would take a simple majority to put it on to the agenda.
Let me double check that just to make sure.
And I just want to make sure that I'm not just telling a tale out of school that's not the one. But Madam Clerk or Mr. Freeman, do I have that right? The second time that we did this, we did bring it forward as a business item briefing, that there was maybe a suspension of the rules and what have. I just want to make sure that I'm not saying something that didn't occur.
Sure, at that time, it had not expired.
It had not expired.
Right, so we put it as a fib and then brought it back at that work session.
So
Or the-
that's the difference here, and I would offer, Mr. Missions, and I'll put myself back in the crosshairs if you don't mind. I wouldn't recommend, Mayor, my intent in my opening remarks were to position it because I thought incorrectly that it was a circumstance where we had maybe had a precedent that would have offered, again, because I said this and I've been very intentional about it. I never want to put you in a position to vote on something the same evening because you may find yourselves in a position that maybe flop from something. And so what I'd offer is, if amenable, my recommendation would be to bring it forward on the 28th and have it then. We'll have had the time to bring any more and will be for general business. And then we do have the advertisement that has to be associated with it to give it because there's a penalty associated with it. So, Mr. Richards, I appreciate what you had said, and I just would offer that as my path forward if that's amenable for folks. And we'll just pray for colder temperatures and that our youth will continue to stay indoors.
I just wanted to follow up and hear what the city attorney found.
So that is for a motion to consider for adoption. So the motion we're describing would not fit under the rules of the 2/3 vote.
Okay.
So that's how it's described. The only way to, when we don't have consensus, it would have to be a suspension of the rules of procedure
Or
to have it on there.
Special rule.
Yeah.
Mr. Farad?
I got a little bit wired crossed. So if we don't adopt it tonight, it's my understanding, based on what I'm hearing, that it would not impact the rollout, meaning it would still go into effect when?
It would go into effect likely at a later date.
So if we adopt it today, what would
It'd be
the,
February 17th.
if we adopt it 2 weeks from now, it would be 2 weeks after that?
Correct.
Okay. In my humble opinion, it would be legislative malpractice to adopt it tonight. I don't think this will impact the vote total. I think it'll stay the same. The difference is it's a principle of making sure the people know that we're voting on it. If it really was the intent, and I'm not trying to throw anyone under the bus outside of, quite frankly, the planning for this meeting, it should have been on this agenda for 7 o'clock tonight if it was going to be voted on tonight. It's not. The 80,000 folks of this city need to know, and I would assume a large portion of them are parents, that we're going to be voting on this. Regardless if no one shows up and it's just as empty, to our friends, if it's just as empty tonight, everyone should have known by rights that we were going to be voting on this tonight. So I would highly recommend this council do the right thing and make sure the public is aware of what we're doing ahead of what we vote on it.
Mr. Mayor, I can't agree more. It's my mistake. This was something, again, that's why I'd asked the clerk and our city attorney. I had misremembered how it rolled out previously. What I think the element that I missed was that it had not lapsed, and I thought it had. And so that's my mistake, my apologies, and I'm thankful for the feedback and input given to us, and we'll move forward smartly in advance of the 28th and make sure that we're all equipped and ready to have a vote. It will be under general business. It will not be a public hearing, and so it'll be positioned under general business for the 28th, if that's amenable to you and your body.
Agreed?
Yes.
Agreed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Roll call. Mr. Ferrari?
Thank you. I know the holiday and council transition, new people on and off. I wanted to renew my request for speed bumps in Richland Hills. I don't think I had an update. If I missed it, that's my apologies. But that is something that the folks over there have been continuing to ask for. And then we'd engaged on Enterprise Drive a little bit. I'd like to have that conversation relatively in the near future about what it would mean to continue to make sure our resources out there are properly working. I continue to get messages from multiple HOAs and the Residency Council at the summit about Enterprise Drive and the speeds that continue there. So I'd appreciate that. Okay, I have two quick items that I wanted to highlight. There's a piece of legislation in Richmond that I don't believe was directly addressed in our legislative agenda that would have profound implications for the city if it is adopted. It's by Senator Sorrell of Fairfax County, I believe. It's related to collective bargaining. The chief concern I have is that it would essentially, and this is the kicker, it would, as I read it, it would remove the local oversight of adopting it. It would essentially force our hand, and if certain petition numbers are met, we would automatically have to enter into collective bargaining regardless of what we say or not, and I think that's incredibly ridiculous. Entirely violates our ability to govern our city as we see fit, and so I would like to see us consider taking an official stance on that policy. Normally we don't do that mid-session, I know this, but considering the profound implications it would have, not only for city employees, but for regional authorities and also the school system, I really think we need to consider either having the mayor write a letter or council actually taking a vote to strongly advise them to not adopt it. I think would be worthwhile. To that end, also today in Richmond, there was a vote to adopt House Joint Resolution 1, which would add a constitutional amendment. I believe this year it would essentially open up the abortion conversation up until the moment of birth, if not after. I think that's highly inappropriate and would cause the city to be in a bit of a funky position about how that would be framed ahead of November. And quite frankly, I think this council has a duty, either again by the mayor itself or a vote, to simply do one thing in response. This doesn't have to be a highly political thing, but I think it's an opportunity of council in a subtle way to say we disagree with that vote. We should recognize the Sanctity of Life Day in Lynchburg. I don't believe it's ever been done, whether that's the mayor declaring it as such or we voting for such a day. But it is January 19th, 2025. And we don't have to blow this up and make it an overwhelmingly, grandiose political theater, but it can be a simple way to kindly admonish those in Richmond who voted for that atrocity of a piece of legislation. Thank you.
Ms. Reed?
Thank you. So I mentioned the tragic deaths of Malaysia, Terrion, and Kingston. When that happened, we launched the curfew, but also I started a coalition that I still run called, it's now called the 40 Ways Coalition. And a couple things. One is we know what happened in Malaysia's case. We're still waiting to find out what happened in Terrion's case and what happened with Kingston. So I will make it, as long as I'm here, I will make it my life's work to get those to come forward who had anything to do with the death of Precious Kingston and who knows what happened to Terrion either, because those mothers deserve to have closure. We have a lot of unsolved cases in this city but these ones with these children are really devastating. And out of Kingston's death, I started the coalition. We're still going strong, and we took a couple months off, but we are launching our January meeting on the 27th. We meet the fourth Monday of every month. So January 27th, our new meeting location, if you're interested in coming, is at the Miller Center. And really the goal is about child safety. It's to protect the youth of our city, and it's open to anybody. We try to focus on the nonprofits and organizations and community members who want to help keep the youth of our city safe. So we really focus on preventative strategies, interventive strategies, and rehabilitative strategies for keeping the community safe, and really having discussions on what we're seeing in our kids and how we can do a better job collectively of protecting them from every aspect, and really talking about some of the issues that we're seeing and explaining why we're seeing them and what we can do a better job of addressing them. So I encourage the community to join us and be a part of it. 40 Ways Coalition. Thank you so much.
Mr. Wilder?
Yes. Just real quick, we do have the Martin Luther King breakfast on Monday at 8:30. It's going to be at the Bella Vista Hotel, sponsored by the Martin Luther King Commission. It's one day for the community to come together and support unity. So I appreciate the work that they do at the library for the Martin Luther King Society. So again, that's 8:30 on Monday. Also, we did unfortunately have another young man to lose his life on last Thursday. He was 16-year-old. I don't even know his name, but I know his mother name is Miss Trent. So we do pray for that family. I don't know the particulars about that situation, but again, a 16-year-old lost his life through, I think, a gunshot. So we're praying for that family. But also continue to pray for the family of Mark Spain. He was a WSTT newscaster. He was a great man in our community. He really brought a lot of the community together. So we're going to continue to pray for his family. He lost his life to, I think, pancreatic cancer. So continue to pray for him. And I want to commend our police department for the arrest of they arrested 3 suspects in the murder of the guy who worked at the cookie store. Yeah. I'm not sure of his name either. Ms. Freedom was at our church. But again, I do want to commend the police department for the arrest of 3 suspects in that area. So and hopefully solving that crime and the work that they do to solve all these crimes that we have in our community. Thank you.
Ms. Timmer?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just wanted to take a brief moment and really thank our frontline workers again. We had the opportunity when Ms. Hart spoke, but they really have put a lot into this winter weather event, from our public safety to water and public works all across the board. So just wanted to take a moment and appreciate them. Thank you.
Mr. Mission?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple things. First thing will be the easy one. We haven't really met in a while, and I don't think that we've congratulated the LCA Bulldog football team for their 42-6 victory for the VHSL state championship. So if we can try to get them in here to recognize them. I actually was going through cleaning some things up over the holidays and found 4 team pictures from when I played on that team, and I looked a lot better back then, I'll say that. And so appreciate them and what they do, and that's just a dominating 42-6. That's incredible. So congratulations to them on that. The second thing, I appreciate Councilmember Feraldi bringing up the HJ1. I was actually watching some of that live today. I don't think that we need to let Northern Virginia Democrats tell us how to treat life here in Lynchburg. And I'd like to potentially look at options that we can do via zoning ordinances and land use to protect life in Lynchburg. So that's something I'd be happy to meet with staff on and see what we can do. I think that's important. And then the third thing is, I appreciate Ms. Finney sending me this email back in November where she let us know that we never voted on removing or restructuring the Office of DEI into the Office of Civil Rights, that never happened. So I appreciate you sending me that email. And I've been doing a little bit of research onto some things through the city website and seeing what we've got. And I'd like to sit down and take a look at, where we're at with DEI in the city. I know that there's committees meeting in several of the departments. I know that it's part of our EEO plan, and we need to start looking at high standards, merit, excellence, and opportunity for our city workforce. We need to make sure that we're doing the best for our citizens with their tax dollars. So I want to take a look at potentially, looking at those options moving forward, what that looks like. But that's all I have, and thank you.
Mr. Dean?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As a former Bulldog, I'm kind of excited about that one. I'll definitely throw that in. Love to see my alumni doing so well. 42-6, good grief. That's great. I will be short on this in honor of the new mayor who likes to be concise, and I would like to do that as well. I'm very thankful for the storm cleanup. Anecdotally, Ward 3 was better than I can remember, and I've been here since 1974, so I've seen a few storms. They were down on my street real quickly, and I really appreciate the work of those people. Everybody who was involved in that, not just the guy driving the truck, but also the police. I very much want to thank you for the work that was done on the murder in Ward 3, has already been mentioned. I had learned about it literally the day we were being sworn in or voting on leadership, but I was excited to find out there was at least 2 and now 3, I believe, that have been charged in that, and that's good. Closing cases is really good for us as a city. Finally, I'd just like to thank my fellow council members, and I know I'm new, and I was familiar with this section of the code that we were going to deal with on tonight, but I appreciate that we're putting it off to make sure everybody's fully aware. I think the citizens deserve us to be thoughtful about it, so I appreciate that. But I just want to express my thanks to my fellow council members for making me feel welcome and part of the team, and I look forward to working with each one of you.
Yes, I'd like to thank city staff for working with me to be able to lead this meeting tonight. I thank y'all. Alicia, Matt, my brother Winter, thank y'all. And all you guys up here who encourage me, thank you. And also, I talk to a lot of people in the city also. And that's why I brought up the curfew to be permanently. You got a lot of older citizens in the city that want a permanent curfew. Some of them are afraid to come out on the porch in the evenings. And I live in that neighborhood. But for 1 year, I know we can do this. And we are going to do it. Thank you. And now, with that said, item number 6, consideration of a closed meeting to discuss appointments to the Community Development Advisory Board pursuant to Section 2.2-3711 A1 Code of Virginia, 1950 amended. May I have a motion to go into closed session?
So moved.
Second.
We're now in the closed. Any discussion? Is there any discussion?
Just a
For
quick note.
Mr. Faradi.
I know there are very specific things we need to say. I want to make sure we say the full code, and then we also have to say topics related to, or no, does that not have to be set for public disclosure?
So I think because it has discuss appointments to that particular committee, you all are probably okay. And just for the I can read the code for the record. It's section 2.2-3711A1 of the Code of Virginia 1950 is amended, and that's specific to personnel and other matters related to appointments, performance, et cetera. So and that would be an acceptable reason for you all to be able to go into a closed meeting.
Did we strike the first closed session on the agenda? Okay.
Yeah. And with that,
Go ahead and take the vote.
yes.
Councilmember Frawley?
Yes.
Councilmember Mischins?
Yes.
Councilmember Reed?
Yes.
Councilmember Timmer? Yes. Councilmember Wilder?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Deemer?
Yes.
Mayor Taylor?
Yes.
The motion passes.
We're now in the closed session.